Do you know what the biggest misconception about the JFK assassination is? The biggest misconception about the JFK assassination is not actually a specific piece of evidence. It's not a magic bullet. It's not a person that was involved or not involved. It's not one part of a cover up or anything like that. The biggest misconception about the JFK assassination is that it is a conspiracy theory. Because the JFK assassination was sold to the American public as though it was a simple lone gunman scenario who fired three shots. End of story, case closed. The government investigated it. They gave us the report, and it's all over. And the conspiracy theory, the widest held misbelief about the JFK assassination is that we don't know if it was a conspiracy, is that we don't know if there was a cover up or a plot. That's not true. When you look at the evidence, and there are millions of pages of documents, there are eyewitness testimonies, there's video, there's photos, there is extensive evidence. And when you look at that evidence, there is no way for you to conclude that there was not a plot or some sort of inside job or some sort of something. Okay. The conspiracy is not up for debate anymore, and it has not been for decades. Not only do we have very clear proof that there was a plot to assassinate the president that went far beyond Lee Harvey Oswald, if he was even involved, but we also have very clear evidence of a plot to cover up the plot. And furthermore, we have evidence of a cover up of the cover up of the plot. The actual conspiracy theories around JFK that are still up for debate are what actually happened that day, because so much evidence was destroyed, so much was obfuscated and hidden for so long that we're probably never going to get the actual truth of what really happened. But it is not a theory that what they told us happened was not what happened. And we're about to run through why that is so obvious and why that is so relevant to today. And when you look at the recent failed assassination on Donald Trump and you compare it to the JFK assassination, you can gain a lot of insight about what's going on today in the world, about what the plan was, and about what we would be currently witnessing had that assassination succeeded. And when you look at that picture and you look at what's going on right now in the Democratic Party, in the halls of Congress, in global events, World War III, it starts to become pretty obvious that we were hairs away from a very different world right now. So we're about to unwrap all of the evidence that we were about to get slid straight into World War III with Iran, and why that didn't happen, and what we might expect going forwards now that the first attempt has failed. So without further ado, we got a lot to cover today. Let's roll the intro and get moving.
Conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it.
Our security is at stake.
All right. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Cancel This. I'm your host, Ian Carroll. We've got a lot to cover today. So I just want to start us off with the important reminder from all of your favorite mainstream press and news organizations to just remind you not to go down the rabbit hole. Doing your own research is extremely dangerous, and you might wind up having ideas. You might wind up thinking for yourself. You might even wind up believing in conspiracy theories. So, just to clarify right off the top, what we are doing today is not an examination of facts, and nothing I say today is a statement of fact or an accusation of anything. It's not even real. Everything we're talking about today is just looking at all the stupid, crazy conspiracy theories on the internet and having a good old time laughing at how crazy all of these conspiracy theorists are. And it's just humor and jokes as we laugh at these silly people with their ideas and their theories. Okay. So just remember that doing your own research might make you believe fake news, and you shouldn't ever think for yourself. Trust the media to bring us the vetted facts the true reporting, just as they've always done. And we're going to start with what they told us about the JFK assassination. Most of us weren't alive during the 60s when JFK was shot. And if you were, you'll remember a lot of this, and you'll still have a lingering feeling of like, what the fuck happened, right? Because it's important to remember that JFK was a very complicated president, and there's a lot about him that was not ideal, but there's a lot about him that was very idealistic. And a lot of his interactions around the globe with world leaders was in the direction of peace as opposed to global war. And this was at the outset of the Cold War. This is as the CIA was starting to manufacture the narrative of the Cold War, and we were saber rattling and starting armed conflict in Vietnam, but US troops were not officially deployed to Vietnam yet. And so we were at a critical turning point in the global war on communism, the Cold War, at which point it was extremely important to certain powers that be that war escalate and that other conflicts around the globe escalate in specific ways that were about to cause a global Cold War. That global Cold War turned out to be highly profitable for a lot of people in the West, a lot of the people involved in this assassination, and it turned into a piece of history that allowed a certain, shall we say, national storyline to develop, one of a security intelligence apparatus that spies on us all the time. One in which the CIA conducts covert operations inside the US, not just outside the US. One in which, shall we say, the CIA's specialty with elections abroad totally stayed abroad. So if you are a JFK buff, you're going to know a lot of this evidence, and we're going to repackage it right now into a nice tight little box where we can put a bow on it and understand the bigger picture of the JFK assassination, because there are so many great resources about the JFK assassination that I highly recommend you check out. I'll link some of them down below. And they all go into so much depth about the evidence of the Warren Commission and the cover up there, the evidence for who were the real shooters and, where were they stationed and how did they get, who was involved, all of that. But today we're just going to stick to the simple facts, the conspiracy theories that just point out the fact that we know enough to know that we were lied to in a huge way. Because the day of the shooting, pandemonium ensued, right? The day of the shooting, it wasn't clear what happened, but the narrative quickly began to form. And this is the narrative that formed. So this is the story as it was officially told to us. 3 shots were fired by a lone gunman named Lee Harvey Oswald from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. Gosh, that is so hard to say. He then, we didn't know this at the time, they didn't find it at the time, but he stashed his rifle in that room, ran out of the room, ran to the back staircase, ran down the staircase, escaped out the building, was later arrested at a movie theater after shooting a police officer when he tried to flee, and was taken into custody. That was when the story started to emerge about who the shooter had been and what had really happened. 3 bullets fired. They've got the guy in custody. And then once they have Lee Harvey Oswald in custody, this is like international news. This is the biggest story in the world. There's coverage from everywhere. There's media, there's journalists, there's reporters. And Lee Harvey Oswald starts shouting to the cameras on live TV, "I'm just a patsy. I didn't kill anybody." Okay? Not a good look if that's true. And if you are, let's just imagine, conspiracy theorist tinfoil hat time, imagine that there was a bigger plot, and imagine that he was just a patsy and he's alive and he's about to start talking. Okay? And it comes out way later that there's actually a lot for him to talk about because he's been hanging out with the CIA for a long time now, working for them. But it's really important that he doesn't say any of those things. So just conveniently, this guy named Jack Ruby walks up in broad daylight in front of cameras and shoots him and kills him. Turns out that Jack Ruby is actually Jacob Rubenstein, but that's a whole other rabbit hole. It turns out that Jack Ruby is actually an FBI confidential informant. Didn't know that at the time. They covered that right up. A whole other rabbit hole. But now the patsy is dead. Thank goodness. And the investigation can continue as planned. But this created a lot of outrage, and there was a whole lot of questions circulating, and the public wanted to know. And so they formulated what they called the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission, much like the 9/11 Commission, their job was to get to the bottom of it all, assess all the evidence, and give us a final report on what really happened in Dealey Plaza that day. Um, the problem was the Warren Commission was composed of some pretty questionable characters. Most famously, Alan Dulles, the ex-director of the CIA, the guy who had basically birthed the CIA into existence, along with his brother John Foster Dulles, in order to, shall we say, do the bidding of their corporate cronies around the world, overthrow governments like the government of Guatemala when they were doing things that the corporatocracy didn't like. Yeah, Alan Dulles had just been fired by John F. Kennedy right before this all happened. And John F. Kennedy was extremely displeased with the CIA and had threatened to disband the CIA, to shatter it into a million pieces. That was not going to fly. But Alan Dulles was kicked out of the CIA and couldn't do anything about it. But once John F. Kennedy was dead, seems like Alan Dulles is the perfect person to investigate, along with all these other guys on the Warren Commission, who 3 of which later came out and testified against the Warren Commission, saying that the Warren Commission was a farce and that they were basically concocted to construct a story that fit what they wanted it to say instead of to look at the evidence and figure out what had really happened. So, anyways, the Warren Commission does its thing, and very privately, very confidentially, without releasing anything more than they needed to the public, asserted that Lee Harvey Oswald had fired 3 shots because they found 3 shell casings in the room where he had fired from, where they also found the rifle that was definitely his. And those 3 shots had hit the car. All 3 had hit the car, except that it had to change real quick while they were doing the investigation because this guy that had been in Dealey Plaza that got hit by a bullet, like hitting the overpass beside him, and then the shrapnel and the concrete hit his face. So there's like clear forensic evidence that one bullet went totally astray and did not hit Kennedy or the car. And so then the Warren Commission is left with 2 bullets to do all this damage to the car. And so they came up with this theory that one hit Kennedy in the head, the other hit the guy in the front seat, all case closed, no big deal. The Warren Commission comes up with this nice, simple report. It claims that it's got it all tied up in a bow, case closed, files it away, lone gunman killed Kennedy. But then, several years later, the CIA comes under fire and under hot water with the whole church committee situation where the CIA had kind of gotten found out doing some bad stuff, and they got majorly investigated, and a whole bunch of documents came out because Congress was digging through their shit. When those documents came out, a whole bunch of extra evidence emerged that poked some holes in the Warren Commission's story and in the Warren Commission's cover-up of the crime. And then later on, that led to so many more questions that a movie got made. That movie was extremely influential thanks to Oliver Stone and his team. That movie got a whole panel embodied in order to declassify all the JFK documents. A bunch of them got declassified, not quite all of them. And now there's millions of pages of documents that are open and available to the public. And all of those documents just further debunked the entire thing. And so the story has evolved multiple times to make up for evidence that came out to the public that was supposed to be hidden multiple times. And the story just gets faker and faker and faker every time. But it's the official story, so you should trust it. So, what are some of the basic issues with this story? So the most obvious one that everyone knows about is this magic bullet theory. Because they only had 3 shell casings, they had to explain all of the damage with just 2 bullets because one went stray. And then quickly there was all these issues with the medical examiners that were trying to do the autopsies. The laws determined that this guy, Earl Rose, was meant to do the autopsy there in Dallas because that's how they do it. But he was actually threatened at gunpoint by government officials, and they took Kennedy's body away and performed the autopsy in private. Well, in a different setting. It was like quote unquote public. All kinds of questions about the autopsy, the brain. We'll get to those in just a second. The magic bullet itself was found on a stretcher in a hospital, and the chain of custody of the piece of evidence, the bullet itself, is clearly fraudulent because you think about it, like if this pen is a part of a crime, it's really important that it doesn't get switched out for another pen, right? Because then how are you going to ever solve the crime? How are you going to know anything is real? So everyone that touches every piece of evidence has to clearly document when they received it, when they passed it off, who to who, etc. The magic bullet's chain of custody has clearly written in its paper documentation that one guy received it an hour before the guy before him received it. So it's a clear timestamp issue that, like, that's obviously someone's lying about when they received the magical bullet. Not to mention that the magic bullet was found on a stretcher after passing through Kennedy's back, out of his neck, into the guy in the front seat's shoulder, through his chest, into his wrist, shattering his wrist bones, through his leg, and into his other thigh, which makes so little sense I can't even describe it. But furthermore, the bullet is completely undamaged. And independent researchers tested out 100 rounds of this exact same bullet against cadaver wrists with the same bone density and everything to see, like, what does a bullet look like after it strikes this wrist bone? Because that was the hardest surface that it theoretically came into contact with. And when bullets hit bone like that, they deform. The front of the bullet tears apart. And that's partly why bullets do so much damage, is because they explode inside of you, and everything inside of you explodes too. And so there's this magic bullet whose chain of custody is clearly fraudulent, whose trajectory and path has been edited multiple times just to make it fit the disclosures that weren't supposed to be disclosed, because all of it relies on 3 shell casings. Because the moment there's more than 3 shells, more than 3 shots, you have not a lone gunman anymore. And a lot of people at the time, including members of the Warren Commission, raised issue with this. Like, dude, this makes no sense. And their testimony was conveniently left out, as well as everyone that had, witness statements and other reports, other autopsy information that did not corroborate the story officially, all left out, all censored. Evidence was burned, documents were destroyed. There was a woman in the floor below where the shooter allegedly was, looking out the window at the events. And she testified to the police that the moment that she saw the shooting, she ran out, left that floor, went into the back stairwell where Oswald allegedly went down the stairs, and she ran down the stairs and found someone on the bottom floor and got out. Her testimony was disposed of because it was not very convenient, because they realized that when they asked her for corroboration, she said, "Oh yeah, my friend was with me. There were 2 women that were in the stairwell at the exact time that Oswald was supposed to be in the stairwell." And when you examine the actual testimony they gave, it's pretty clear that that's an issue. And furthermore, they had a 3rd friend who stayed on the floor where they were near the stairwell, who also probably would have seen Oswald had he gone down those stairs. They all knew Oswald personally because they worked with him, because Oswald worked in that building, because the CIA had gotten Oswald a job in that building, because Oswald, it turned out upon later investigations, had been working for the CIA for decades. Oswald had defected to Russia, probably as a CIA ploy to get him implanted in Russia as a mole. And when he returned from Russia, he did not go through the normal repatriation screening. They normally would do a ton of interviews, because this was the Cold War, to try to make sure that you're not a Soviet spy now that's flipped and is going to come spy for the Russians. Oswald didn't have to do any of that. And there were some researchers in the government that noticed that and got really curious and started investigating Oswald to see what the hell was going on. One of those people in specific that worked at the State Department had whole boxes of files on Oswald before the Kennedy assassination ever happened, because he was digging into, why is this guy coming back from Russia and getting slipped into the country without any of the security measures? That guy got fired from the State Department 17 days before this shooting happened, and all of his evidence was kept out of the Warren Commission and pushed away as though it did not exist, because it all clearly implicated that the CIA had been working with Oswald for a very long time. He had been a plant in Russia. He had been an agent provocateur in the whole socialist Cuban movements around the United States. He was a CIA agent provocateur. And then they got him a job at the building in Daley Plaza, specifically. Furthermore, there were 2 other assassinations that same fall that were planned that did not go off. Both of those had the CIA's fingerprints all over them too. And when people started to dig into them, they quickly found potential CIA patsies in both of those instances too. People that worked for the CIA in some form that had a similar rap sheet to Oswald that could be turned out and cut loose if they needed to be, who had been given jobs in buildings with perfect lines of sight to motorcades that Kennedy had planned. Neither of those went off, and then in Dallas, it succeeded. Well, a version of it succeeded. They utterly botched the whole thing. So there's all these witnesses reporting things that don't line up. There's all this bullet shit that doesn't work. But beyond all that, the gun is not even the gun. The gun that was brought in as evidence does not match the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald bought from the magazine where they traced the gun. It's not the same gun. It doesn't measure the same length, and the strap attachments are not on the same places. On Lee's gun, in his family photos that his wife took of him, the strap attaches on the bottom of the gun. And in the rifle that they brought in as evidence that was allegedly his gun, the strap attachments are on the side. Oopsies. Although they did the ballistics testing and the bullets were clearly fired from this gun, it's clearly his gun. Just another piece of the story that was an attempted cover up, and they weren't prepared for the level of botched that this shot would take. Because had it been, one clean shot, had the shooter actually succeeded on the first shot, maybe they wouldn't have had to fire all these other bullets that just peppered the car with gunfire. We could go on. There are hours of discussion to be had about the autopsy and the brain matter and the hole in Kennedy's head, but just let's suffice it to say that they showed autopsy photos that the official autopsy photographer did not take of the brain that was not the real brain. It was easily identified that it had been in formaldehyde for up to 3 weeks before those photos were taken, when it should be a fresh brain. The bullet wound in Kennedy's head clearly was described by all eyewitnesses of the body before the official story started, that there was a giant hole in the back of his head as though an exit wound had blown his brains out, because that's how a bullet works. And then they showed us autopsy photos that were basically a stitched together head. The photos had been modified and it did not match anything that anyone else had seen prior. The photos of the brain didn't match the brain that anybody had seen prior. There's even theories that Jackie killed him, and it's like, dude, I don't know, man. I don't know who killed him. The driver, the Jackie, the man in the manhole, any of the other mob assassins all around the plaza. Who knows? Watch Everything is a Rich Man's Trick, JFK to 9/11 on YouTube. Watch JFK Revisited. I think you have to stream that one. There's a lot of good resources with a lot of different evidence and a lot of theories. If you want the theories on how it really went down that are theories, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick on YouTube. It's not necessarily 100% true. It's just a lot of good evidence for you. So anyways, the body was clearly botched. The head wound clearly botched. They even had to change caskets. There's a whole rabbit hole on him going inside of one casket and then coming out of the plane inside of a different casket. It's a mess. And when you start to look at all the evidence, it becomes apparent that there were lots of shooters in the plaza that day, just in case something went wrong, because they needed to kill Kennedy real bad for multiple reasons. And when the first shooter did not succeed, maybe it was Oswald, maybe it was someone else, every other shooter started to open up and bullets came in from all directions. And that's why in the Zapruder film that was later declassified, you can see that he's been shot in the neck first when it goes behind the sign, and then later his head kicks backwards as he's shot from the front through his head. And there should be no shooter in the front if there was only one shooter, Oswald, in the book depository behind him. So the story completely crumbled. And there is ample evidence that not only did that story crumble, but there's also ample evidence of the active cover-up of all other evidence that did not align with that story. And then there's evidence of them trying to cover up the cover-up by re-explaining everything in new ways, presenting new evidence, trying to get witnesses out. Like, it's completely mind-blowing. So what does it mean about world events when you look at the big picture of the Kennedy assassination relative to what Kennedy was doing around the world and what these global powers, what this deep state, whatever it was, these government agents wanted to do? John F. Kennedy had gotten into office by sort of sweet talking his dad and his dad's mafia and mob connections into making them feel like he would play ball with their sort of deep state organized crime agendas. And once he got into office, he sort of backstabbed them a little bit. He was not as pliable as he made it seem like he would be. He sort of played the game a little too well. And they were not happy about that one bit. Israel had also recently stolen nuclear technology from the United States via a mole in the US state apparatus. They were stealing not only the nuclear technology, but also highly enriched US nuclear materials in order to make their own bomb. And Kennedy was pushing extremely hard for inspections of the Israeli nuclear facilities and was pushing to shut down the Israeli nuclear program. He didn't succeed at that. And to this day, Israel has nukes that no one will acknowledge they have, but everyone knows that they have. And they have not signed the International Nuclear Treaty that all other Western nations that have nukes have signed. That's not a secret. That's not controversial. We all know that Israel has nukes. They stole them from the US. Kennedy was on them about that nuclear program, and then suddenly he wasn't on anything. Furthermore, he had threatened to disband and dismantle the CIA. They don't want that. Oh, yeah. I didn't even mention JFK taking down the Fed by introducing a bill that would make silver backed US currency a thing again. And you can't have that. So the dollar needs to be protected at all costs. And by protected, I mean that the bankers need to keep control of the fiat currency. And if you're going to try to back our currency with something like gold or silver or Bitcoin or what have you, you can go blow your head off because they ain't going to have that. But there's all sorts of theories about how probably Israel was involved in a big way. Probably the CIA was involved in a big way, including Allen Dulles himself. Probably Lyndon Baines Johnson, the vice president who became the president, who then, enacted all the things that these deep state players wanted. He was probably involved with some level of knowledge or whatnot. And the mafia and the Jewish mob were almost certainly involved, probably supplying a lot of the shooters on the day of the crime. That's what we know so far. And there's probably a whole lot of other, shall we say, associated actors in law enforcement, in government, in organized crime, in media that played along with it to varying degrees. We don't really know the whole truth, but if you really go down the rabbit hole, you can ascertain a lot of it. So, what happened in the world following the JFK assassination? Escalation in Vietnam into what became the Vietnam War. Israel's nuclear program went on about its business. The Cold War ramped up all around the world, and the CIA grew and grew and grew and continued to fuel us with this Russia is evil. Actually, it wasn't even Russia, it was the USSR. So James Angleton, who was very involved in the JFK assassination and very involved in Lee Harvey Oswald's CIA career, he fed us all this narrative of the USSR is extremely powerful and they're super dangerous and they have so many nukes they could obliterate us at any moment. Well, he actively had zero data, and all the data pointed to the USSR actually being a failing state, and they were completely impotent, and they were not a threat to us for almost the entire Cold War. But that is not the story that the CIA painted. And if you want more details on that, read this book, and it will put it all extremely clear for you from all very well sourced material that Angleton and the CIA during that time frame were basically just perpetrating a giant disinformation campaign on the American public to make us all afraid of the USSR, to trick us all into supporting all these Cold War measures all around the world. Sound familiar? Let's just say that Kennedy threatened just about every aspect of that war machine's deep state agenda. And they were at a pivotal point in history where they needed their plans to keep going according to plan. And they thought when they elected him, when they let him get into office, they thought he was going to play ball. And then he started to play his own game, and they taught him how the game works. Okay? You see where we're going with this? And I need to remind you all, before we get into the Trump part of this whole story, that I voted for Democratic presidents my whole life. I was raised Democrat. I grew up Democrat. I thought Democrat. I voted for Obama. I was gone when it was Trump versus Hillary. I wasn't in the country. I didn't vote in that election, but I was not a Trump supporter at the time. I didn't like Hillary, but I didn't know anything. I would have voted for her if I was here, probably. I don't know. Maybe I would have voted for someone else, but I wouldn't have voted for Trump. I was completely dumbstruck that Trump had gotten elected. But once the veil is lifted and you start to look beyond the media propaganda about Trump and about the whole world, and you start to just think critically and actually just look at all the evidence for yourself and look at what's going on in the world for yourself. I mean, I don't personally come to the conclusion that Trump is a saint by any means, but what is actually going on right now? We're in a suddenly very different timeline because that bullet missed Trump's head by fractions of an inch. And while we're on the topic of a bullet narrowly missing Trump's head, it's worth pointing out that there is still debate about whether a bullet hit his head or not. The FBI director even insinuated in front of Congress under oath that maybe a bullet did not hit his head, which is a pretty strong stance to take without clear evidence. Then it prompted the medical examiner that did the work on Trump right afterwards, that examined his ear and everything, to put out a public statement saying in no uncertain terms that it was clearly a gunshot wound and that he has treated countless gunshot wounds and that that was 100% what it was. And he has no doubt about his findings at all. So there's that, maybe he's lying, take it or leave it. Who knows? Some people are definitely going to still claim it was all staged. But we do have a photo of a bullet passing by Trump's head, literally capturing the bullet. And at first it was like, that's a fucking fake photo. That's not real. You can't take a photo of a bullet. But then when you look into how they got the photo, you realize that they got the photo because the New York Times literally had a photographer with a high speed camera trained on Trump's head at that rally. They actually specifically sent a guy with a high speed camera to film Trump at a rally. It was the first rally that mainstream media had ever thought to live stream. That's not weird at all, is it? And then you think about the history of these sorts of attacks that have to do with, Israel. And what do you see? JFK assassination? Turns out Zapruder just happened to be there filming. Then you think about 9/11, you're like, huh, that whole dancing Israelis thing was because they were there to film the attack. That's the allegation. Obviously, it's just a conspiracy theory. Obviously, it's all made up. Don't look into it. Don't go read about it. You might start believing some bad ideas. But they were there to film, allegedly. Okay. And then you're like, okay, so why did they just decide to suddenly live stream just this one Trump rally? And why was there a high speed camera pointed at him? So high speed that it was able to capture a bullet. Because imagine had the bullet hit Trump's head. Suddenly, we would have live streamed to us the whole right, all the conservatives, all the Trumpers would have watched Trump's head get blown off on live TV. Imagine the outrage. Imagine what you could do with that outrage if you had a carefully constructed narrative ready to steer the blame at a certain foreign nation named Iran. And after the failed assassination attempt, we saw the tricklings of that, shall we say, narrative still trying to kind of come out, even though there's all kinds of problems and other things we were looking into. And it didn't really make sense that it was Iran once we were digging all this other stuff up and Twitter was exposing all these other questions. But had we had no information, we might have gotten sold a story just like Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman who had associations with Russia. He was a Russian agent, right? That's what they tried to sell everyone about Harvey Oswald. It looks a lot like they were going to try to sell us that Crooks was acting on behalf of Iran and he had these Iranian connections and Iranian bank accounts or whatever it was. And it's Iran that murdered Trump because they put a threat out on Trump, right? Like, you see where we're going here? There was preparations made, it seems, to blame the killing of Trump on Iran and then to take all of that outrage from the conservative base that would have been insanely powerful and to target it all at Iran. And who wants war with Iran? The same guy that had a speech scheduled here in front of Congress just a week or so afterwards. Interesting. And he still tried to pass it off as though it was Iran that was behind it all, even though we all know that Iran had nothing to do with it. But Bibi still could not help himself from blaming Iran in his speech as though it was all, a closed case that Iran was behind it. Right? You see how we narrowly escaped a direct line into World War III? Right? But then the story gets weirder. Because it wasn't enough to try to assassinate Donald Trump on live TV, allegedly. Because they also had this Biden problem going on that needed fixing. And if you if you just take the conspiracy theorists' crazy story about the Trump assassination and you roll with their crazy timeline, you think, Biden dropped out of the race right after that. His health complications came to a head right after that. So we were about to wind up with a presidential race that very well could have been Nikki Haley versus Kamala Harris, or even Hillary Clinton, or whoever they wanted to put in, like, Michelle Obama, whatever. It still might not actually wind up being Kamala Harris. So we're about to wind up with two war hawk neocons as our only choices for president, while they have just tried to steer all of our hatred towards Iran so that they could take us all into World War III. Right? But they've got to get rid of Joe, and they've been waiting because Joe is dying, allegedly. There's even reporting on Twitter that he might have already passed, allegedly. Obviously, don't believe any of this crazy conspiracy garbage on the internet, but we're going to take a look at it just because it's funny for entertainment purposes, right? Because the internet started to notice that after Joe Biden disappeared off the face of the earth and then resigned from his campaign for president with a Twitter post, an X post, sorry, Elon, didn't mean to dead name you, and it wasn't on White House stationery, and the signature did not match his signature, at least not super well. We have questions, right? And then there's this weird recording where he calls into Kamala live, and it's clearly not live. And she has a Freudian slip and starts to say, "I know you're still on the record call. It's good to hear your voice, Joe." Is like the most cringe shit we've ever seen. Obvious deception, right? And they're not telling us what's going on with him. They're not telling us why he stepped down. They're not telling us anything. And then he appears in public again out of nowhere. And he's walking like he's super healthy all of a sudden. And then he appears for his official resignation, like apology, whatever it is. He appears, and the video is kind of weird. And people started to have some questions. But it wasn't until they saw him walking around that the internet started to really go wild. Because Joe Biden is suddenly pretty tall. And there's a lot of examples. And it's crazy, dude. Oh my God, it's fucking crazy. Again, to be clear, I would never insinuate that this stuff is real. This is just funny theories on the internet that you should not believe because the New York Times is very clear that reading conspiracy theories on the internet might lead to free thinking and dangerous ideas, but they're pretty funny to look at. So we're going to look at them as a joke. Because Bibi Netanyahu and Joe Biden are both officially 6 feet tall. Okay. And then people started to compare photos of Jill and Joe walking side by side before and after. They examined her heels, they measured things. It's interesting. I don't know. He's looking pretty tall. Maybe COVID really got him stretched out, right? And that's not even to mention the whole face thing. And I did a whole expose on the fact that the CIA has had, CIA like skin masks for decades. It's detailed in this book that they had them. It's detailed in this book that they had them. It's not a secret. You can even watch the wife of the man who invented them, who she later was in charge of that whole program. She has given TED Talks about it. She once briefed President George H.W. Bush in the White House, in the Oval Office, wearing one of those masks, and he didn't realize it was a disguise. That's how they're so good. Skin masks do exist. They're real. Obviously, this isn't one of them. Like, obviously, this is Joe Biden. But I'm just saying you should be aware of that kind of stuff. And I did a whole video about it on the short form platforms this week that did pretty well because everyone's got some questions. And we're not going to get any answers. But one answer that I can give you is that when you look at Joe Biden's ears, people are going into like, why has he got these weird ear holes all of a sudden? It's like, actually, I looked. He's always had those weird ear holes. I mean, let's be real. If you're going to make a mask, you're going to be pretty careful about the ears and the details and stuff. And those are the same looking weird ass ears he's always had, except for the earlobes. Those are very different. And when you start to look into earlobes, they apparently get saggier with age. They don't recede into your head. So I'm sure he got plastic surgery a bunch of times that changed his whole appearance, and they cut off his earlobes and like stitched his ears to his head or something. Obviously, it's the same guy. He's just feeling tall and he's suddenly walking really spry and quickly, and everything's weird and different. It's just so, just to humor these crazy conspiracy theorists, if we just watched an assassination attempt on Donald Trump orchestrated by, I don't know, like the deep state, whoever they are, and then right on the heels of that, we get like a coup inside the Democratic Party and Biden gets replaced with like new Biden and he endorses Kamala and all this weird shit. What is going on? And when you look at it, what's going on is a fucking cover up scramble to try to fix this shitstorm of them missing their shot on Donald Trump. And then the secondary shooters also missing the shot because it looks like there were at least 3 shooters. We got evidence of maybe on the water tower, evidence of maybe in the windows by the building. There's all kinds of, like, maybe in a tree stand. There's all kinds of theories right now. And we don't know what's real. But the audio analysis that we've been looking at for a while now pretty clearly shows 3 different audio signatures of 3 different rifles shooting on that day. Not entirely clear who shot what was what, but we have reason to believe that at least 2 different people shot at Trump. Who knows when we'll get answers, if we ever will. We're certainly not going to get answers about this whole Joe Biden thing, I don't think, although it would be badass if we did. So then, on the heels of all that, Bibi Netanyahu, the devil himself, comes to America to address Congress. And Nick Fuentes brought back this total gem of a stat that during his previous address to Congress in 2015, Congress interrupted his speech 39 times for standing ovations. 25% of the duration of the speech consisted just of applause. Holy shit. And oh boy, did they outdo themselves this time. Most people had different counts, but it was something around 49 or 50 standing ovations in his single speech at Congress this time. It was atrocious to watch. I turned it off. I didn't even watch the whole thing. Totally shameful. Some people apparently broke into his hotel and released maggots and bugs and shit in his conference room inside of his hotel at the Watergate, which is awesome. I mean, obviously don't ever do that. I would never condone such a horrible act of anti-Semitism, but it was um entertaining. Then obviously the riots broke out outside of Netanyahu's speech, and totally organic Palestinian protesters were burning American flags and vandalizing, destroying statues. No agent provocateurs in sight, obviously. If you want a more thorough breakdown of that, Candace Owens has been doing great digging into some of the people that were at those protests and whether or not they were actually organic and whether or not they were actually what they seemed to be. In the meantime, James O'Keefe and O'Keefe Media Group are doing what they do and just exposing the shit out of weird, corrupt government agencies. This time they're going after Act Blue, which is how the Democrats are funneling all of their money in through small donations through, regular people that donated once or twice. They'll use their name and send in thousands more donations through their name to launder money into Democratic Party. And so that's how Kamala Harris raised like record amounts of money in a single day through all small donations that were totally organic. But O'Keefe's been doing this hilarious reporting where he'll find in the public record that, like, weird. FEC database shows that this person donated like 475 times today or something like that. And they go to the person's door and they ask them, hey, have you donated like $400,000 to Act Blue in the last 2 years? And the person is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because they didn't, obviously, because they are laundering money into the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is currently the CIA party. Okay. If you aren't aware of this, open your eyes. I am from there. I am one of you guys. And clearly it has been co-opted. I was once a liberal and I was once a Democrat. And we used to believe in anti-war, duh, anti-big corporations, duh, regulate the big corporations like big pharma, like big agriculture, like the military industrial complex and the banking sector. You know, we used to believe in holding the powerful accountable, in freedom of speech, because that is essential to journalism. And somehow, a whole bunch of people have been tricked into thinking that the Democratic Party now stands for war at all costs. Otherwise, you're going to kill democracy. Don't question Pfizer or any big corporation because they have your best interest in mind as they pay for your advertising on your news stations. Don't hold anyone accountable, least of all the banks post 2008, as Obama comes in and bails them all out. The fuck happened to the Democratic Party? It's about time we go back and take back the left. Not even to mention that, like, now suddenly you can be pregnant and a man. It's like science. We'll just edit science. Let me remind you that science is built on questions. The whole foundation of science is that anything scientific is replicable, as in, if it's true, you can replicate that experiment and you'll get the same result. And it's only through asking questions, forming hypotheses, and testing those hypotheses that we know what's real. And anyone can read science, anyone can understand science, and anyone can practice science. And if you're not supposed to question the science, that's not science. That's dogma. That's corporate propaganda. That is totalitarian bullshit shoved down your throat so hard you can't breathe. And I don't mean like I took a fuckload of fentanyl and I'm about to die, can't breathe. I mean like open your fucking eyes, guys. Anyways, I'm on a tangent. I'm fixing to like go and take back the left. Someone's got to do it, dude. We need both sides. Like we need the conservative, like rights of the individual, conservative values, what's worked before still works. We need that in our lives. But we also need like the power of collective governance to regulate the too rich and the too powerful, to regulate corporations, to regulate billionaires. We need both sides. We need individual liberty on the right, and we need collective accountability on the left. And we need both of those to be holding the powerful to account to protect the rights of citizens and regular people and their freedom of speech, their freedom of expression, their right to bear arms, which the government shall not infringe, all of the rights that our constitutional republic ensure to us. We need both sides of the political bird to be working together for us instead of getting co-opted by the fucking CIA to trick you into believing a bunch of bullshit. We are currently at the outset of World War III, and we have a chance to avert it. And believe it or not, Trump is probably the guy that will avert it. And that's a whole other topic. But he is currently in talks with the president of the West Bank of Palestine. He's currently in talks with Netanyahu. He's currently in talks with Russia and Putin about a ceasefire in Ukraine. He's good friends with Kim Jong. He is actually diplomatic with all of these evil people that we're supposed to be at war with. But if you think about how do you achieve peace, it's by talking to people. It's by having diplomatic solutions so that you don't have forever wars. But who is it that wants forever wars? That would be the military industrial complex, the CIA, and their fucking cronies that have taken over the Democrat Party for the last 8 to 12 years. You dig, Democrats? And so you have been told that Trump is like Satan himself and he's a horrible person. Yeah, maybe he is a horrible person. I don't know. But when you actually start to look at his actions, you realize that he is the anti-war candidate, which is so fucking weird. But the fact that he is the anti-war candidate is very likely the reason for the assassination attempt in the first place. Just like JFK, which, by the way, Trump was pretty fucking good friends with, was it JFK Jr.? That's a fun rabbit hole. That's a whole other rabbit hole. Be careful what you read down that rabbit hole. You might wind up believing some pretty dangerous ideas. So just remember that everything we've been told probably lies, and everything that you're going to find along the journey to truth is hard to trust. And I don't know what of what I've shared today is for sure true. I don't think any of it is for sure the way it is. Like it's all just, probabilities of truth. Is it certain that Joe Biden is still alive or is not alive? No, I have no idea. But I do know for sure that there is a greater than 0% chance that he has been replaced. Might be a small chance, but it's worth following the story because it's hilarious and it's crazy. And if it is true, holy shit, right? So you don't need to believe everything you see. When someone presents evidence, you aren't going to immediately make that your opinion, and you shouldn't. You should just be taking in information from all the different theories, all the different researchers that are presenting information to you, and just judging, like, does that match my worldview? Does that rearrange? Does that fit with the other theories I'm looking at? Does this fit? Does that debunk? And you just slowly paint the picture in degrees of likelihood. It's not super likely that that's what's going on, but I'll keep my eye out. It's super likely that that is what happened, but I'm open to evidence to the contrary, right? This is the Socratic method. This is just the process of being a regular, rational adult. And it's not a problem if someone thinks a different think than you. It's okay if someone arrives at a different conclusion than you. You don't have to start fights with people. You don't have to be mean to people. You don't have to hate anyone, okay? It's all just ideas. And we're all just regular people that are getting fucked by the Federal Reserve and working day jobs until we die. Okay. We are all way more similar than any of us are to these evil people at the top, regardless of what party you're in, regardless of how you vote, regardless of your identity politics. It does not matter. Like, a Trump supporter is probably more similar to like a trans Black Lives Matter activist than either of them are to Larry Fink. Okay. Just remember that next time that you're getting in a fight on Twitter, or next time that you're hating on someone in real life for thinking something different than you. We're all just people, right? And everyone's just trying to do the best by themselves, the best by their family in a world full of poison, full of greed, full of inequality and bullshit. So just try to be nice to each other. Try to build some bonds and some bridges instead of breaking people down and starting fights. Try to seek the truth, do your own research, go down the rabbit holes, fuck the New York Times, think some crazy ideas, have some free thought. This is America after all. While it's still legal, use that freedom of speech for whatever the fuck you want, right? Drink some water, be nice to someone today, and I'll see you in the next one.